There's something sitting at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Alaska. Sitting there quietly in the dark, in the cold, in the deep, completely undisturbed. It's been there for millions of years, longer than our species has existed, longer than most of the landmarks we consider ancient, longer than almost anything we can point to and say, that was here before us. It's sitting there right now, in water so deep and so cold and so dark that most of us will never see it, never touch it, never even know it exists. It's called a polymetallic nodule, and the current U.S. administration is deciding how far it wants to go in opening the door for companies to go get minerals like these from the seafloor. Welcome to Salt and Siren, the current situation. I'm Brianna, marine biology student, mom, Navy wife, and someone who genuinely cannot scroll past something like this without saying something about it. I'm also going to be honest with you up front. This episode is political. I told you when I started this podcast that I'm political and I can't pretend this world isn't on fire when I talk about the ocean, because the world is on fire and the ocean is being asked to pay for it. Today we need to talk about what's happening on the ocean floor, including in U.S. waters off Alaska and in places like the Pacific's Clarion-Clipperton Zone. We need to talk about what's at stake, who built the protections that kept key U.S. offshore waters safe, who is dismantling them, what the science actually says, and whose voices are being left out of this conversation. This is not a comfortable episode, but I didn't start this podcast to be comfortable. So let's dive in. So what is seabed mining? Before we get into the politics, I need to make sure you understand what seabed mining actually is. Because when most people hear the word mining, they picture a mountain, a hole in the ground, dirt and machinery, and hard hats. This is different. The deep ocean floor in many regions, especially places like the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the Pacific, is covered in what scientists call polymetallic nodules. They're essentially rocks, lumpy potato-sized formations that sit on the seafloor, and they're packed with manganese, nickel, cobalt, copper, and other metals that go into electric vehicle batteries, smartphones, defense technology, and the infrastructure of what we're calling the green energy transition. These nodules have been forming for millions of years, incredibly slowly, only millimeters to maybe a centimeter over millions of years. Some of these formations began growing long before humans existed. According to organizations and researchers studying the industry, the deep seabed holds some of the largest untapped mineral deposits on the planet, and demand for these minerals is surging as governments and companies race to build clean energy infrastructure and high-tech systems. But here's what mining those nodules actually look like in practice. You send massive equipment, industrial-scale collectors, to the ocean floor. You drive or drag them across the seafloor, vacuuming up the sediment and the nodules together. You pump the material up to a ship on the surface, process out the minerals you want, and discharge the rest. The sediment, the water, the byproduct, sent back into the ocean. Scientific reviews have warned that this process creates sediment plumes that can travel far beyond the mining tracks, smothering filter feeders, disrupting food webs, and affecting ecosystems well outside the immediate footprint of the machines. They also note that mining activities generate significant noise and light pollution in the water, impacting marine species across a wide area. And then there's the question of recovery. Studies of experimental disturbance sites, areas where test mining or physical disturbance has been carried out since the 1970s, show that seafloor communities can remain altered for decades. Tracks and scraped areas are still visible, and some groups of animals, especially larger fixed organisms that live attached to the nodules or seafloor, show very slow or incomplete recovery over those timescales. Scientists like Dr. Adrian Glover at the Natural History Museum in London have stressed that we still have virtually no idea what lives in many of these regions, and that we don't yet know how long full recovery would even take, or whether it would happen at all. Decades of visible damage from small test areas. Now imagine scaling that disturbance up across large swaths of seafloor as commercial operations move forward, whether that's in the Pacific or in the future in the U.S. waters. Right now in the United States, federal agencies are actively studying and planning for potential extraction of critical minerals from the seabed, including off places like the Gulf of Alaska and other outer continental shelf regions. They're exploring how to regulate mineral extraction in areas that have never hosted this kind of activity before. I need to take a moment and talk about what actually lives in these waters, because this is Salt and Siren, and we don't talk about ocean policy without talking about the ocean. The deep ocean, the midnight zone, the bathypelagic zone, is one of the least understood and most extraordinary ecosystems on this planet. Creatures that produce their own light in total darkness, species that have adapted over millions of years to cold temperatures and crushing pressure, animals that science hasn't even named yet. In the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, for example, scientists have discovered thousands of species, many completely new to science, just in the areas already surveyed for potential mining. Researchers say that many species in nodule fields are likely endemic, meaning they live only in those habitats, and could be at risk of extinction if their homes are removed. But it's not just the deep sea creatures. In U.S. waters, the regions under discussion for expanded offshore extraction, whether for oil and gas or critical minerals in the longer term, overlap with some of the most productive fishing grounds on Earth, including the Bering Sea, the Gulf of Alaska, and the Aleutian region. These waters support major commercial fisheries for pollock, salmon, crab, halibut, and more. Fisheries that feed millions of people and underpin entire coastal economies. Scientists and advocates warn that waste discharge from mining vessels and other offshore industrial activities could spread over large distances from the point of release, potentially affecting plankton, fish, and higher predators, and putting those fisheries at risk if not tightly controlled. Many areas in and around the northern Bering Sea and Bering Strait have already been recognized as ecologically and culturally important. Some are closed to certain types of commercial fishing or designated as critical habitat for threatened and endangered species, such as marine mammals and seabirds. And then there are the people. Alaska is home to more than 200 Alaska Native nations. The northern Bering Sea is at the heart of their subsistence way of life. Indigenous communities, including the Yupik, Chupik, and Inupiaq peoples, have relied on the marine resources of the Bering Sea, on whales, walruses, seals, fish, and seabirds, for food security, cultural identity, and survival for countless generations. Regional organizations like Kalway-Rak Inc., the Bering Sea Elders Group, and the Association of Village Council Presidents have been central to protecting these waters for decades. They've consistently called for decisions about offshore development to respect indigenous rights, subsistence needs, and traditional knowledge. When federal agencies open public comment periods on offshore leasing or planning in the Bering Sea region, Alaska Native leaders and community members show up and speak clearly about what is at stake: their food, their culture, and their future. The system, as it exists, has often sidelined those voices. I want you to hold on to that while we talk about what that system has done and what it's currently undoing. This is not a new fight. The question of who gets to use Alaska's offshore waters and for what has been going back and forth between administrations for decades. And I think understanding the timeline is so important, because when you see what was built and what is being dismantled, the picture becomes very clear. In December 2016, President Obama issued Executive Order 13754, designating the Northern Bering Sea Climate Resilience Area a historic protection for these waters that was achieved in large part because of advocacy from Alaska Native organizations, including Kalwayrak Inc. and the Bering Sea Elders Group. The order limited oil and gas leasing in specific areas, maintained existing protections from bottom trawling, and created a formal role for tribal input in federal decision-making through a task force and advisory body. The Northern Bering Sea region is home to one of the largest marine mammal migrations in the world, with beluga and bowhead whales, walruses, and seals moving through the Bering Strait every year. Obama's order recognized that protecting this region was not just an environmental priority, it was a moral and cultural one. In 2017, Donald Trump issued Executive Order 13795, which revoked Obama's Northern Bering Sea Order and reopened parts of the Arctic and Atlantic to offshore oil and gas leasing. Alaskan Native tribes and environmental groups sued. A federal district court later ruled that a president could not unilaterally undo certain types of offshore withdrawals under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, effectively restoring key Obama-era protections in the Arctic Ocean and parts of the Atlantic. President Biden maintained and expanded many of those protections. In January 2025, near the end of his term, he announced a package of ocean protections that included large withdrawals from new offshore oil and gas leasing along portions of the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, the Gulf of Mexico, and in the Bering Sea. He also formally reaffirmed protections for the Northern Bering Sea Climate Resilience Area with the goal of making them more durable. And then, January 20th, 2025 happened. The current administration has made clear that it wants to accelerate domestic production of critical minerals, including those that could come from the seabed. It has moved to roll back or reconsider offshore protections and fast-track review and permitting processes for seabed mineral exploration and potential commercial recovery, especially in international waters like the Clarion-Clipperton Zone and around certain U.S.-affiliated areas. What makes this particularly important to understand is that as of 2025 and even now in early 2026, no company has yet begun full-scale commercial deep-sea mining anywhere in the world. The technology is still being tested. The environmental impacts are still being studied. Major knowledge gaps remain. Because of this uncertainty, several countries, including Germany, Canada, and others, have called for moratoria or precautionary pauses on deep-sea mining in international waters. The European Parliament has called for a moratorium. Major companies like BMW Group, Volvo, Google, and Philips have joined a business coalition calling for a halt to deep-sea mining until its impacts are properly understood. We're talking about running a largely irreversible experiment on one of Earth's last unexplored frontiers, in waters that indigenous communities and coastal peoples depend on in the name of getting minerals quickly. I want to talk about something that I think is really important as this story develops. because it's going to be framed in a very specific way, and I want you to be ready for it. This is going to be sold to you as patriotism. America versus China. Critical minerals for national security, energy independence, jobs, securing the supply chain for clean energy. The language is going to be designed to make opposition feel un-American, to make protecting the ocean floor feel like choosing someone else's interests over the United States. And I'll be honest, that framing is highly effective. It works. It's designed to make environmentalist and Indigenous communities sound like they're standing in the way of progress, like they're choosing foreign interests over American ones. But here's what that framing deliberately erases. It erases Alaska Native nations whose food security and cultural identity are directly tied to these waters. It erases the commercial fishing industry, whose livelihoods depend on healthy Bering Sea and North Pacific ecosystems. It erases the findings of scientists who have documented that deep sea ecosystems show persistent damage decades after disturbance, and who warn that large-scale mining could drive species extinctions and long-term biodiversity loss. It erases the fact that the technology to do this with minimal harm does not yet exist, and that our science is still catching up. And it erases the most fundamental question of all. What does it cost the ocean? Not what does it cost in dollars, not what does it cost in jobs or geopolitical standings. What does it cost the ocean? Because the ocean doesn't get a seat at the table in a federal lease sale. It doesn't get to file public comments. It doesn't get legal representation. It has people like us. There's also something I want to name directly, and I say this as someone who cares deeply about climate change. These minerals are being marketed as essential for the green energy transition, electric vehicles, renewable energy infrastructure, a cleaner future. And I understand that framing too, but there is something deeply and fundamentally wrong about destroying ocean ecosystems in the name of saving the planet from climate change. We cannot mine our way to sustainability. We cannot sacrifice the ocean to save the climate. These two things are not compatible because the ocean is the climate system. The ocean absorbs roughly a quarter of human carbon dioxide emissions, helps regulate global temperature, and produces a large share of the oxygen we breathe. Destroying it in the name of fighting climate change is like burning down a hospital to build a pharmacy. I'm not going to end this episode in despair. That's not what Salt and Siren is for. Connection before conservation. That's the whole philosophy of this podcast. You have to know what's at stake to care enough to act. And now you know. So here's what you can do right now. Several organizations, including groups like Ocean Conservancy and Earth Justice, are actively campaigning against rushing into deep sea mining and are calling for precautionary pauses and stronger protections in U.S. waters and beyond. They have petitions, action alerts, and tools to help you contact decision makers. One signature, 30 seconds, and if you can share it, every single person who sees it is someone who might not have known that this was happening. Listen to the people most affected. Alaska Native organizations, Kalwayrak Inc., the Bering Sea Elders Group, the Association of Village Council Presidents, and many others are frontline voices in fight over offshore development in the Bering Sea. They have been working to protect these waters long before most of us were paying attention. Seek out their statements. Amplify what they're saying. Follow their lead. Talk about it. Tell someone what you learned today. The most powerful thing about podcasts is that information travels person to person. You heard this, you tell someone, they tell someone, and that's how things change. And if you want to take formal action, pay attention to public comment periods on offshore energy and mineral planning, especially those run by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and other federal agencies. Comments from the public matter. They create a record. They force accountability. Check the link in my bio to sign the petition. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to live in Alaska or even have seen the Bering Sea. You just have to care. And if you're here listening to Salt and Siren, I think you do. There is something sitting at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Alaska. It's been there for millions of years, quietly, in the dark, in the cold, completely unbothered by the governments and the corporations and the geopolitical competitions happening thousands of meters above it. It doesn't know it's valuable. It doesn't know anyone wants it. It doesn't know that federal agencies are drawing lines on maps and debating how and where to open up the ocean for new kinds of extraction. But Alaska Native communities know. Scientists who have spent months at sea and years in the lab know. They've gone down in submersibles and sent cameras to the abyss and seen with their own eyes what disturbance leaves behind. And now you know. Connection before conservation. You can't save what you don't love. You can't love what you don't know. And now you know. I'm Brianna. This is Salt and Siren, the current situation. The link to take action can be found in my bio. Use it, share it. And to Alaska Native communities and all Indigenous peoples fighting to protect the waters their ancestors have stewarded for thousands of years, we hear you. We are with you.